everybody, this is Steve from Black Octopus Sound, and I want to show you a little tutorial on some drum processing using the brand new Behemoth Drum Sample Pack. Now, first things first, as a long-term producer, I've been producing for 13 years now. This is, without a doubt, my favorite electronic dance music drum sample pack I've ever come across. I've been a sample pack connoisseur for most of my career, and the fact that this is released with Black Octopus aside, this is, in my opinion, one of the hardest hitting drum sample packs, if not the hardest hitting drum sample pack I've ever found. Like, with this sample pack, you can quite literally just drop and drag these samples into your DAW, your respective music software, and your tracks will pound. So without further ado, I want to show you just a little bit of creative drum processing using this pack to help just show you one possible way of how you can use it. So first things first, I'm looking squarely at this second audio track here, which I'm going to rename Drum Loop. And so I have a series of processing, which I'm going to select all of them and just throw them in a group together so you can get a clear snapshot of before and after. So this is the drum loop before. And this is after. And so it might not sound like much. It might sound like I've diminished the caliber of this drum loop, and I did absolutely do that on purpose. So let's look at my effects chain. I have my auto filter, which is high pass filtering out the low frequencies, so I'm losing the low end of this loop. And the reason why I'm doing that is because my main drum loop above it is going to be driving the low end. I have some overdrive and some saturator going on. The overdrive gives it a lo-fi grit. It adds some distortion to it, and it gives me this grittiness that I want. And the saturator kind of fattens it up a bit. The way a saturator works is it adds harmonic content to existing sounds. So it fills out the sound spectrum, giving the sense of a fuller, fatter sound. And I have two compressors after, with the sidechain mode activated, and the audio is coming from my main drum loop, and then underneath that, under the main drums, one is being routed to my kick, and the other is being routed to my snare. So the gift that's giving me is the kick and snare of my main drum loop are triggering the sidechain duck of my drum loop itself. So this is what. And you'll notice that I have these absolutely slammed. I've pinned the threshold, so there's a lot of gain reduction happening, and the ratio is super high. So this is giving me like a pumping kind of motion. So that's what I want. I want that pumping motion because as I couple this with the main drums, kick and snare, it's going to absolutely pound and sound like, give the compression moving this way gives this drum loop a little bit of a slam type quality when it's layered over the main drums. So here's the main drums soloed, and I'm going to walk you through this. And I have just a single instance of a kick, and these kicks are so hard hitting that I don't need a bigger kick. I'm quite satisfied with this kick as it is. And the snare, I got a little creative with it. So you'll see that on my snare pad, I have 4 different layers all together. Now, to create a multi-pad, I'll just quickly demonstrate on a totally different pad using these minis. So I drop and drag on the D# pad, and on a Mac, I'm going to hold the Command key, and for PC, I believe it's the Alt key. So I'm dropping and dragging a new mini. So I'll go for mini 10, holding the Command key and still holding it, dropping and dragging on that pad. And so now you'll notice it renames to instrument rack. So I'll call it mini multipad. Good enough. And so now I have a parallel chain of these two sounds going together. So I did that for my snare. So I'm just going to, undo, delete. So the snare pad, I have 3 different snares happening. We'll just solo that. So I have 3 snares and a clap. So the 3 snares give me a hard-hitting transient and a full-bodied sounding snare, and the clap kind of tickles the high end a little bit, giving it a little bit of sparkle on the top. So you may have noticed that this transient doesn't hit very hard. And what I've done to do that is I've gone into the filter global section. At first I went right click, simpler to sampler, and this is the sampler, the full meal deal sampler in Ableton, and I've turned up the attack time. So I'll turn it down. Bam, that transient's back. So I'm gonna just undo that and keep it around 50 milliseconds. And you'll notice I've lost that snap. The reason why I have that is because I'm using a different snare sample to drive that. And as you can see, I've shortened the envelope and given it an EQ boost with an EQ8, right at the peak of that low transient. And I've shaved off a little bit of the low sub rumble because I don't really need that in my snare. And so now these two together, I have the body of this snare without the transient and only precisely the transient of my second snare. So that gives me the body of one snare with the transient of the other. And to help fill that a little bit more, I've added another snare and this clap. With the clap, you may notice that I've filtered out the low end off the clap, and I don't want the low end of the clap because the low end of the snares are driving that enough. So I've shaved off the low end, so I've just got that top end sizzle on my clap, creating that extra bite on my snare. So I've got two hi-hats, one that's closed that I've hyper isolated, and I've engaged the filter with a low pass. So I'm shaving off the low end rumble of the hat that most hats have. And I have an open hat here as well, and I'm going to re-engage the high pass filter as well and do that similar quality. I have a shaker, and I've done exactly the same thing at a different frequency range, so because there's a little bit of mid-range information from the shaker that I really enjoyed. And I've got two percussive hits. And so this is my MIDI pattern that I've created. Simple kick, snare, fairly basic hi-hat pattern with a little bit of a different type of syncopation. So it's a more of a polyrhythmic drum loop with a shaker, and I've put in those percussive hits. So additionally, I've added an effects chain that I use on absolutely all of my drums. And so this will come with this drum loop, and you can use similar versions of this using Ableton's native plugins as well. So first things first, I have a parallel compression chain happening where I have my original and a hyper compressed version as well. And so the fact that they're parallel means that they're both playing at the same time simultaneously. So I have my original feed with this hyper compressed feed layered over each other, creating a thicker sound. I've used my favorite plugin company, Melda's Multiband Saturator, and you can use Ableton Saturator to add extra harmonics. I've used their EQ to give an EQ cut in that lower mid-range. Central mid-range. This is the area that the human ear is the most biologically sensitive to. And so you'll find that my kicks and snares, the transients are well below this central mid-range, and the treble instruments are well above it. So you'll notice that there's this natural dip in that area. So I'm just taking this extra step to remove clutter there. And this is something that I've told a lot of my music production students over my years, is that because this area of the spectrum is hypersensitive to the human ear, it makes sense because that's the range of the human voice. So biologically, we're designed to be more sensitive to that area. So the more that we can remove unnecessary audio information there, the better off that we're going to be, and the more pleasant and enjoyable of a listening experience our music's going to be. So this also helps make room for things like guitars and vocals, etc., and other things that occupy that part of the spectrum. So I also have an instance of Ableton's Glue compressor with a high attack time, and the high attack time lets the drum transient squeak through without the gain reduction happening. There's a lot of great tutorials on compression out there if you want to get to know Compressor better. So I recommend a longer attack time for drums. And I've used Native Instruments Transient Master to give the attack of the drums a little bit of a boost. So that creates that extra sense of snap. So I have this on my drum chain as well, and you will get this rack with your with this Ableton project file. So that's my main drum, and now I'm going to re-engage the drum loop. Let me take off the effects chain from my drum loop, and just so you can hear what it sounds like with both dry. It gets a bit messier and a little bit less contained, and there's just a lot of drum hits flying over the place. And while at first glance it might sound huge, we want to have less is more as often as we can. And a drum loop like this without this effects chain engaged will create a messy drum mix. So the idea is to have the drum loop driving the energy while the main drums are driving the thump. So back to the drum loop, one more piece I want to cover is I'm going to turn off the effects chain again, just for the sake of this next example. So you'll notice this drum loop has a bit of a swing to it. Some of the drums kind of have like a little bit of a swing whip into the next drum hit. And so one thing I've done is I've right-clicked and clicked Extract Groove. Now, extracting the groove takes the MIDI information, the exact placement points of all these drum transients, and puts that information as a MIDI file into my groove pool. This little wave here opens up my groove pool. So one thing that I've done is I've clicked my main drums and my main drum clip and go down into this clip information here where it says groove, and there's my Behemoth drum groove template. And so now I've applied the groove from this loop that I've extracted to my main drums. And that gives them a sense of unity, so all the drums hit at the same time and kind of makes them gel together a little bit better. And that's my drum tutorial on how I use this amazing drum pack that is the Behemoth. And so I invite you to check out the free samples that we have offered on the Black Octopus website. That's blackoctopus-sound.com. And you will surely see the Behemoth drum loop pack on there if you take a look around. And I hope you enjoy at the very least the free drum sample pack, because these are amazing drums. And I look forward to hearing them in your productions. Okay, ciao everybody. Enjoy.